The kitchen was eerily quiet, and the air was thick with tension. Grant stood frozen, staring at the shattered plate in his hand. His face, usually calm and composed, was now filled with rage. With a sudden motion, he hurled the plate against the wall. The porcelain shattered, the pieces scattering across the floor as if symbolizing something breaking beyond repair. His voice trembled with fury. "Are you serious, Liam?" he shouted, his anger reverberating through the room. The restaurant, once known for its warmth and impeccable service, felt cold and uncomfortable. The diners in the dining room shifted uneasily in their seats, their eyes darting nervously toward the kitchen. A woman at a nearby table, her disappointment palpable, shook her head and muttered under her breath, "I used to love this place. Now it's just disappointing." But amid the chaos, one person remained unnoticed, Jackson. Seated at a corner table, he watched silently, blending in with the crowd. Dressed casually, he was a ghost, observing the unraveling of a place that had once been his pride. The clatter of dishes, the hurried movements of the staff, the visible fear in their eyes. It all painted a picture of a restaurant on the verge of collapse. What had gone wrong? Who was responsible for this downfall? Jackson knew that tonight wasn't just another rough shift, it was a turning point. And the answers he needed were hidden in the fractures of the team he had worked so hard to build. The restaurant had always been more than just a business for Jackson, it was the culmination of his dreams. Rusty Fork had started as a small diner in a quiet corner of the Midwest, a place where neighbors and friends gathered to share meals, stories, and laughter. Back then, Jackson had worked every shift, from washing dishes to cooking in the kitchen. He knew each customer by name, and each employee was like family. But as the years passed, the diner transformed into a chain, expanding to 12 bustling locations. The success was undeniable, but with each new restaurant and every new hire, Jackson found himself further removed from the heart of his business. What started as a close-knit team began to fracture under the pressure of growth. Jackson was no longer a hands-on owner, he had become the CEO, overseeing the operations, the profits, and the future of the company. Despite the success, something was missing. The Rusty Fork that Jackson had built, filled with passion, dedication, and personal connection, felt like it was slipping away. He no longer knew the names of the staff across all the locations. The chefs were no longer the hard-working cooks he once worked beside, and the servers were just numbers, faces he saw on spreadsheets but never in person. The sense of community that had made the restaurant special had faded, and in its place was a business struggling to maintain its image. The turning point came when Jackson realized that his connection with the staff, the people who made the restaurant what it was, had weakened. His role as a CEO had distanced him from the very people who had built the brand. He had become a figurehead, sitting in meetings, signing contracts, and making decisions from a boardroom. The truth was, he didn't know what was happening inside his own restaurant anymore. He had neglected the emotional pulse of the place. Tonight, he had returned undercover, posing as a regular diner, hoping to get a first-hand look at what was really happening. He'd heard murmurs of issues within the staff, rumors of high turnover, frustrated employees, and customers who were no longer satisfied with the food or service. But hearing about problems and experiencing them firsthand were two very different things. As he sat in the corner, unnoticed by the staff, Jackson began to notice the subtle signs of dysfunction. Liam, a young server, was trying his best, but his movements were stiff and uncertain. He was clearly nervous, likely from the earlier outburst in the kitchen. Grant, the head chef, was pacing near the kitchen doorway, his frustration palpable. He yelled at the staff, his tone harsh, his patience thin. The kitchen staff moved hurriedly, eyes cast down, afraid to make a mistake. Jackson could feel the tension in the air. The restaurant was no longer a place of joy and comfort. It was a pressure cooker, with everyone on edge. The staff were overwhelmed, and the customers could sense it too. Whispers of discontent filled the dining room. A middle-aged couple at the bar discussed the change in energy, remarking that the service was no longer what it used to be. An elderly woman complained about the wait time, her frustration growing with each passing minute. As Jackson observed, memories from his early days at Rusty Fork flooded his mind. He remembered the long hours spent behind the counter, the late nights cleaning the floors, the sense of camaraderie among the team. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. As the restaurant grew, the sense of community that had made it special began to erode. The staff were no longer a family. They were cogs in a machine, struggling to keep up with the demands of a growing business. Jackson glanced around the room, his heart heavy with the weight of the realization. The success of the Rusty Fork had come at a cost. It had lost its soul. He had lost touch with the very people who had helped him build it. The outburst from Grant in the kitchen wasn't just about a bad shift or a rough night. It was a symptom of something deeper. It was a reflection of the frustration, the stress, and the resentment that had built up over time. Jackson's thoughts were interrupted as the scene in the dining room grew more uncomfortable. Grant's anger was palpable, and the staff were clearly shaken. Liam, already rattled by the earlier confrontation, fumbled with his tray, and a glass of water splashed onto a customer's lap. The room fell into an uneasy silence as the customer gasped, her face flushed with surprise. Liam's face turned bright red with embarrassment, and the tension in the kitchen only deepened. It was then that Jackson realized the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a one-time incident. The problems were deep-rooted, stretching beyond bad leadership or poor service. This was a crisis of morale. The culture of the restaurant had deteriorated, and no one was addressing it. The staff were under pressure, and the customers were noticing. For the first time in years, Jackson felt the weight of his decisions. He had built this empire, but somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with what had made it great. He needed to reconnect with the staff, to understand their struggles, to rebuild the trust that had been broken. But tonight wasn't just about observing, it was about understanding. Jackson needed answers, and he was determined to get them. As the night went on, Jackson observed more of the unraveling. He watched as the tension between the staff grew, as customers grew more impatient, and as the once thriving restaurant slowly began to crumble under the pressure. Jackson's heart tightened with every new realization. This was not the Rusty Fork he had built. It was time for a change. And that change had to start now. The night's tension reached a boiling point, and Jackson could feel it building in the air. He had witnessed a lot of breakdowns over the years, but this was something different, something deeper. As the kitchen buzzed with frantic energy, Jackson observed from his corner, noting every sharp exchange, every shaky step the staff took. The cracks were undeniable now. In the kitchen, Grant's voice boomed with frustration, cutting through the air. He was no longer just a chef, he was a man on the edge, overwhelmed by the mounting pressure. "Why is this plate still sitting here, Ethan?" Grant barked at one of his cooks. "This is a simple order, and you can't even get it right. Move or get out of my way." Ethan, the young cook, flinched at the words, visibly shrinking under the weight of Grant's anger. Jackson's chest tightened as he watched the scene unfold. This wasn't the passionate chef he had once known. This was someone exhausted, who had run out of patience and empathy. As the tension mounted in the kitchen, Jackson's attention shifted back to the dining room. Liam, who had already been rattled by Grant's outbursts earlier, was struggling to keep it together. He moved from table to table, his steps hesitant, his hands slightly trembling as he served food. The weight of the earlier chaos had clearly taken its toll on him. As he approached one table, a customer looked up, eyeing him with a mix of pity and frustration. When Liam accidentally spilled a drink on the customer's lap, a ripple of murmurs swept through the room. The customer gasped in surprise, and Liam froze, his face going pale with embarrassment. Jackson could feel the collective discomfort of the dining room, the awkward silence that followed. This wasn't just a mistake. This was the culmination of tension, frustration, and fear. Liam, a young server trying his best, was breaking under the pressure, and no one was there to help him. Grant stormed over to Liam, his face red with fury. "Can't you do anything right?" he yelled, his voice cutting through the silence of the room. "You can't even handle a simple task. You're making us look like amateurs." The customers stared in disbelief, the air thick with the weight of the public humiliation. Liam stood there, eyes wide, his body stiff with embarrassment. He didn't respond. He couldn't. The words hit too hard, and the humiliation was too deep. Jackson felt a deep ache in his chest watching Liam struggle. He had seen this before, the crippling pressure of a toxic work environment, the damage that came when leaders couldn't or wouldn't support their team. It wasn't just the staff who were suffering, The customers were feeling it too. Whispers of dissatisfaction grew louder, punctuated by the quiet murmurs of guests at nearby tables. "This place used to be so good," one customer said, shaking their head. "What happened?" The atmosphere in the room had shifted from discomfort to disappointment. The familiar hum of conversations had been replaced by awkward silence, broken only by the occasional clink of silverware. Jackson could sense that this wasn't just about one bad night. It was a systemic failure, a breakdown of communication, support, and trust. In the back, the pressure was intensifying. Jackson observed the staff quietly trying to do their jobs, but the tension between them was palpable. Ethan, his face tight with frustration, was doing his best to keep up. He moved from station to station, his movements stiff and robotic. He wasn't just cooking, he was surviving. Jackson watched as Ethan's jaw clenched in anger, the strain of the night evident in his every step. The stress was written all over his face, but no one offered help. The kitchen, once a place of creativity and teamwork, had turned into a battleground, with Grant at the helm, directing orders with sharp commands but no guidance. Jackson's gaze shifted again, this time toward Clara, the restaurant's floor manager. She had always been the one to keep things together when they started to slip, but even she seemed to be crumbling under the weight of the chaos. Her face was tense, her steps purposeful but strained. She moved between the kitchen and the dining area, her voice calm but firm, trying to soothe customers and keep the staff moving. But Jackson could see the cracks in her facade. She was carrying the weight of everyone's failures on her shoulders, and the burden was too heavy. As the night wore on, the atmosphere in the restaurant became suffocating. The staff, once a well-oiled machine, were now moving in slow, uncertain steps. They were all just trying to make it through the night, but Jackson could see it clearly. This wasn't just about getting through one rough evening. It was about the cumulative effect of months, maybe years, of neglect. The culture had deteriorated, and the damage had already been done. The real turning point came when Jackson overheard a conversation between two of the employees near the bar. Their voices were hushed, but Jackson could hear the anxiety in their words. "Did you hear what happened yesterday?" one of them asked, glancing nervously toward the kitchen. Grant yelled at someone again. "It's like this place is falling apart." The other employee nodded, worry etched on their face. "I heard someone might go public with it. This place could be all over social media for the wrong reasons." The words hit Jackson like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a bad night. This wasn't just about Grant's anger or Liam's mistakes. This was a deeper issue, one that was beginning to spill into the public eye. If something didn't change soon, the Rusty Fork was at risk of losing everything. The reputation, the trust, the hard-earned success, it was all hanging by a thread. Jackson had come to the restaurant to observe, to understand the root of the issues. But now, he realized that his observations had led him to a harsh truth. The problems at the Rusty Fork weren't just about bad service or bad leadership. They were about a broken culture that was eating away at the heart of the restaurant. And it was time for Jackson to step in and fix it, before it was too late. The tension in the restaurant had reached its breaking point. Jackson could feel the weight of the moment as he continued to observe the staff's struggles. Each movement, each interaction, felt like a symptom of something much deeper, something that had been festering for months. But the real shock came when Jackson stumbled upon something he hadn't expected. Something that would forever change the course of the evening. As he quietly slipped away from his table to the restroom, Jackson's eyes landed on something taped to the wall. 3 resignation letters, hastily written in black ink, stood out against the dull, worn paper. He moved closer, his chest tightening as he read each letter. The words were short, but they spoke volumes of frustration, disappointment, and a complete breakdown in trust. Each letter was a silent cry for help. Liam, Ethan, and another server had all submitted their resignations. They were done. They couldn't take it anymore. The oppressive weight of Grant's anger, the lack of support, the fear of losing their jobs with each misstep, this was their breaking point. Jackson stood there for a long moment, the letters in his hand like cold steel. These weren't just words on paper, they were the result of months of neglect, ignored concerns, and a toxic work environment. Jackson felt a sharp pang in his chest. This wasn't just a bad night. This was the culmination of everything that had gone wrong, everything he had failed to see from behind the desk of his CEO office. He quickly took a photo of the letters, knowing he couldn't ignore what he had found. He typed a quick message to Miles, his trusted colleague back at headquarters. 3 staff members ready to walk. Something's breaking down fast. Need to act. He paused for a moment before hitting send, watching the phone screen flicker with the sent message. As Jackson returned to his seat, he could feel the weight of the situation settle into his bones. He hadn't just come to observe a bad shift. He had come to understand why his restaurant was falling apart, and now, in the quiet aftermath of those letters, he understood the truth. Back in the kitchen, the pressure was mounting. Grant's frustrations had boiled over into outright contempt. He yelled at anyone who came near, lashing out at Ethan for a mistake he had made earlier in the night. "How hard is it, Ethan? I've told you this 100 times. He snapped, his words sharp enough to cut through the tension that filled the room. Ethan's face tightened, his hands shaking slightly, but he said nothing. There was no point in arguing. Grant wasn't listening anymore. He was too far gone. In the dining room, the once lively atmosphere had now shifted into something colder, more suffocating. The customers, who had once been regulars, no longer felt the warmth of familiarity that had made this restaurant special. Now, they whispered behind menus, exchanging looks of disappointment and frustration. A couple near the front spoke in hushed tones, their voices tinged with regret. "It used to be so much better," the woman said softly. Her companion nodded, his expression resigned. "Not anymore." The whispers continued, and Jackson knew that if something didn't change soon, the damage would be irreversible. Not just for the restaurant, but for the people who had poured their hearts into it, the staff who had worked tirelessly, sacrificing their well-being for a place that no longer cared about them. But what really shocked Jackson wasn't just the resignation letters or the muttered complaints. It was the realization that Grant, the man who had once been a beacon of leadership in the kitchen, was now an anchor dragging everything down. The cycle of anger, frustration, and fear was no longer just about bad management. It was about a culture that had been poisoned from the inside. Jackson took another sip of his drink, trying to steady himself. His mind was racing with a million thoughts. He needed to act, and he needed to act fast. But how? What could he do to fix this? What could he do to heal the wounds that had been inflicted over time? It wasn't until the next confrontation between Grant and Clara that the true gravity of the situation hit Jackson. Clara, who had tried her best to keep things together, was now visibly shaken. She stepped into the kitchen, her voice low but firm. "Grant, you can't keep doing this," she said, her eyes filled with concern. "You're pushing everyone too hard. We're losing the team." Grant, his back to her, didn't turn around immediately. When he did, his face was a mask of frustration and exhaustion. "I'm the one holding this place together," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "I'm the one doing everything, but no one sees it." His hands were clenched at his sides, his body rigid with anger. Clara, as steady as she could manage, stepped closer. "You're breaking them, Grant," she said softly. "And you're breaking yourself in the process. We need help. We need to work together. This isn't just about you anymore." Grant's eyes flickered with something. Vulnerability, maybe? But it was quickly replaced by stubbornness. "I've been doing this alone for months," he shot back. "I don't have time for this touchy-feely crap. If you want to fix this, start working harder." The conversation had reached a deadlock, and Jackson, sitting in the dining room, realized that he couldn't just stand by any longer. The truth was clear. The restaurant was crumbling, not just because of Grant's behavior, but because the entire culture of the business had fractured. Leadership wasn't just about keeping things afloat. It was about guiding the people around you with respect, care, and support. The biggest twist wasn't just that Jackson had uncovered the deep flaws in his restaurant's operation. It was the realization that his own role in this breakdown was far greater than he had ever imagined. His failure to see the cracks, his failure to stay connected with his team, had created this mess. And now, he was the only one who could fix it. Jackson knew that something drastic had to be done. But first, he had to make sure everyone knew that this wasn't just another bad night. It was a chance to rebuild. To start fresh, to address the heart of the problem, and to restore the Rusty Fork to what it once was. A place that valued its people and its customers. A place where leadership wasn't about control, it was about care. He stood up slowly, making his way to the kitchen. His next steps would define everything. It was time to face the truth. The next morning, Jackson called an emergency meeting with the entire staff. It was time to take ownership of the mess that had unfolded over the past few months and make things right. He had seen the cracks, felt the tension, and now he needed to confront them head-on. The weight of responsibility was heavier than he anticipated, but it was a burden he was willing to bear. As the staff gathered in the dining area, the room was quiet. The usual banter, the small moments of camaraderie, were absent. Everyone was on edge, waiting for Jackson's next move. Grant stood at the back of the room, his face unreadable, while Clara stood slightly off to the side, her arms folded tightly. Ethan, Liam, and the rest of the team were scattered around, some visibly tense, others nervously shifting their weight from foot to foot. Jackson stood in front of them, calm but determined. He looked around at the faces of the people who had helped build Rusty Fork, the very people who had poured their hearts into making it a success. This wasn't just about fixing the business, it was about restoring the trust that had been lost. He had failed them, and now it was his job to make sure that the restaurant, the team, and the spirit of the place were rebuilt from the inside out. I've been observing, listening, and taking in what's been happening over the past few months, Jackson began, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of his words. And the truth is, I've let this place slip. I've let you all slip. He paused, letting the words sink in. The room was silent, the staff's eyes fixed on him. I've spent too much time in boardrooms, and not enough time here with all of you. And it shows. He glanced around the room, his eyes meeting Grant's briefly before shifting to the rest of the team. The issues here go beyond bad shifts or mistakes. It's about a culture of fear, frustration, and lack of support. And I take full responsibility for that. Grant's expression shifted slightly, the anger he had carried for so long now replaced with something else. Maybe guilt, or maybe regret. Clara, who had been holding the team together for so long, nodded quietly in agreement. It was clear that everyone knew the problem, but no one had been willing to confront it until now. Jackson took a deep breath, his next words coming slower, more deliberate. The way we've been operating, where mistakes are punished, where anger rules the kitchen, and where staff feel unsupported, that ends today. This is no longer just about serving food. It's about how we serve each other. He paused again, scanning the room. I want to restore the trust between us. I want us to be a team again, not just a group of employees scrambling to survive. The silence in the room was thick, but it was no longer uncomfortable. The staff, some with their heads down, others quietly listening, were starting to feel the weight of Jackson's words. They had been living in the chaos for so long that they didn't know how to trust again, how to rebuild. But Jackson was giving them a chance to turn things around. He continued, his voice softening. Grant, he said, addressing the chef. I know you've been carrying a heavy load. I know you've been trying to keep this place running, but doing it alone isn't leadership. It's survival. And it's hurt everyone here. I want you to take a step back. I want you to go through leadership training. Empathy, patience, and support. That's what makes a good leader. You can't do this alone anymore. Grant didn't say anything at first, his jaw clenching as he processed Jackson's words. But after a long moment, he nodded slowly. I get it, he said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. I've been pushing too hard. I didn't know how to ask for help. Jackson nodded back, offering him a small but sincere smile. That's the first step. Asking for help. We're in this together now. Jackson turned to the rest of the staff, his voice growing firmer. Clara, he said, acknowledging her quietly but firmly, you've been holding everything together in ways no one even sees. You're the backbone of this team, and I'm not asking you to do it all anymore. I'm giving you the title of branch manager. It's time you got the recognition you deserve. Clara blinked in surprise, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process his words. I don't know what to say, she said, her voice filled with emotion. You don't have to say anything, Jackson replied. Just know that I see you. You've earned this, and you're going to help me rebuild what we've lost. The room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. For the first time in a long while, the weight of the restaurant's issues was beginning to lift. But Jackson knew that this was only the beginning. The real work would come later, when the cameras were gone, when the meetings were over, and when the real process of healing would take place. He continued, his voice softer now, more introspective. The truth is, this place became about the wrong things. We let our success get to our heads. But success isn't just about growing and expanding. It's about staying connected to what made us great in the first place. The people. The ones who serve, who cook, who clean. You are the heart of this business. Jackson paused, looking around at the staff, who were now listening intently. I'm not here to fire anyone. I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to make this right, for all of us. But it's going to take time. It's going to take patience. And it's going to take trust. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was hopeful. For the first time in months, the staff felt the shift. They felt the recognition, the sincerity, the promise that things could be better. And, perhaps most importantly, they felt seen. Jackson's final words echoed in the room as he stood up to leave. Let's start fresh, together. No more fear. No more anger. Just a team working towards something better. Over the next few weeks, Jackson worked alongside his team, listening more, guiding less. He attended the leadership training with Grant and sat down with each member of the staff to hear their concerns, their ideas, and their hopes for the future. The change was gradual, but it was real. Clara settled into her new role as branch manager, guiding the staff with a calm, authoritative presence that everyone respected. Grant, with the weight of the training behind him, began to lead with a more measured approach, offering support and encouragement rather than criticism. Liam, once shy and anxious, began to show confidence in his work, knowing that he had a team that cared about him. The restaurant didn't become perfect overnight. But the energy in the air had shifted. The staff began to work together as a team, not just because they had to, but because they wanted to. And for the first time in a long while, Jackson sat back and watched, with a quiet sense of pride. He had seen the restaurant at its lowest, but now he was watching it rebuild from the ground up. The guests who returned began to notice the change too. The energy was different, lighter, more welcoming. Even the older woman who had once walked out in disappointment returned, and this time, she smiled. I can feel the difference, she said softly. Whatever changed, it matters. Jackson's heart swelled with quiet pride as he watched the team work in unison, the laughter of the staff mixing with the hum of the restaurant. The rebuilding wasn't about fixing broken dishes, it was about fixing the heart of the place. And in doing so, he had restored something far more valuable than success. He had restored trust, connection, and respect. The Rusty Fork was on its way to becoming something it had never been before, authentic, genuine, and alive again. Jackson stood quietly in the back corner of the dining room, watching his team work. The atmosphere was lighter, the energy more positive. For the first time in a long time, the restaurant felt like it was running on all cylinders. Not because everything was perfect, but because the people behind it were genuinely connected. They were a team again, and it wasn't just about what they were doing, it was about how they were doing it. This story is more than just about one restaurant or one CEO. It's about the importance of leadership, empathy, and connection. In our careers and in our personal lives, we can often get so focused on the end goal, on success and growth, that we forget about the people who make it all happen. Jackson's journey reminds us that no matter how far we've come, it's never too late to reconnect with what truly matters. The people we work with, the relationships we build, and the culture we create. Change isn't easy, but it starts with a single step, acknowledging where things have gone wrong, being brave enough to make the hard decisions, and investing in the people who matter most. If this story resonated with you, think about your own team or your own leadership style. Are you leading with empathy? Are you building a culture that supports everyone? Take a moment to reflect on where you can make a change, and don't be afraid to start today. What can you do right now to make the people around you feel seen, heard, and valued? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Let's start a conversation. And if you found this story inspiring, consider subscribing for more insights into leadership, culture, and growth. Because change doesn't just happen, it's created by people who care.